Welcome. In this tutorial, I'm going to share the process of dimensioning different things in Revit, and I'm going to give some tips and tricks to make the process easier. Let's now see how dimensioning works in the general. To make our drawing much easier to read, we have to place at least 3 types of dimensions. The first one, the dimension between the openings, doors and windows, and the relation between them. The second one is dimension between grids, which mainly symbolizes the structural element of the building. And finally, we have to put the dimension on the edges of our building. For instance, here we pick this edge and that edge, and this is that type of dimension. Okay, let's now explore the dimension tool in Revit. To access the dimension tool, we have to go to annotate and then go to align the dimension. Now here you will have these options on the modify panel. Another way to access the dimension tool is to type in DI as a shortcut, DI, and you will have all these options. We will have the aligned dimension, linear, angular, and many others, but you will also have some options here that we are going to see next. Okay, now let us see how to place the dimensions and various options. To start, we are going to start with the aligned dimension. Let me type in DI, and by default the aligned dimension is selected. And with this aligned dimension, we are going to go to other options here. We have here on the pick options, we can choose to pick between the wall center line, wall faces, center of core, or faces of the core. What this means is the sides of our walls. We can either decide to pick from the central point or the central reference line, or we can decide to pick from the edges of the walls. On the other option here, we have individual references or the entire wall. If you pick the entire wall, this means that we are going to place dimension on the entire wall. Now let's pick that one and place the first dimension. But before we go there, we click to these options here, and you can see that the openings are checked. If you uncheck these openings and click OK, now if you place the first dimension, you will see that we have only the dimension from the edges of the wall. Now let's delete this dimension and go back to DI again, and here I am going to go to options and I'm going to check openings, and I am going to use width as the references. Now I'm going to click OK, and now what I am going to do, I'm going to pick this wall here and then drag the dimension lines and then click to place our dimensions. You can see that with openings selected, we now have the options to place dimensions on these doors, windows in here, but we also include the edges of the walls. Now let's see how to kind of use another option here. If I go to DI again, I will go to options, and instead of width, I'm now going to use centers here, and I am going to mainly use maybe this interior wall here. Let me place this particular dimension. You can notice something here. The dimension on this wall has placed a dimension in the center of our opening. In this particular case, this is in the center of the door. And you can see that we have this dimension here. We do not normally use this type of dimension, but if we, for instance, want to fix this door in the middle of this particular wall, we can use this dimension. We can select this dimension here, and we go to EQ dimension. This means that we must have equidistant dimension from the door to the other edge of the wall. I'll Control Z because I do not want that for now. Now let's use the other options to place other types of dimensions. I'm going to go to DI again, and I will go to the entire wall here. From entire wall, I'm going to switch to individual references, and I'm going to place dimensions between grids. I'm going to select this grid here, the other grid here, all the way to the other grid, and this grid here, and then I go a little bit outside and I will place this dimension. You can see that we have dimensions on all the grids here. The last one, I'm going to go to DI again and go to entire wall, but this time I'm going to go to openings, and I will uncheck the openings, hit OK, and I'm going to pick this wall, and this dimension is going to be for only the edges. Now let us go on and place other types of dimension. Let's go to DI again, and to start we are going to go with the linear one. This one is, it has to always be straight at 90 degrees angle. Now I'm going to go to linear, and I'm going to maybe pick this point. I'm picking this point also, and you can see how this dimension looks like. Let's go to the next DI again and go to the angular dimension. Let me pick, I can pick this edge and pick that edge, and now we are going to place this dimension like this. Let us now go to the radial dimension. Let me pick that one, and what I'm going to do to select this one, and you can see that it is going to calculate the radius for this arc. I'm going to pick this one and place it. Now let's go to the diameter, which is kind of same to radial, but this time it is a diameter here, and I will place this one. Let's go to the arc. How does it work? I first of all pick the arc length, and then I'm going to pick some other points on this particular arc here, and I will place this dimension like this one. Let us continue with the support dimensions. Let's start with the support elevation. Here I'm going to pick this one, and I'm going to select first of all this, and I'm going to place one here like this, and let's go to the next one like this one, and we are going to place. You can see we have now one, and we can continue as long as the stairs goes up. Now DI again, let's go to this spot coordinates, and we are going to place the coordinates here. Let me pick this particular line, and you can see that it is located at north 10 degrees, east 10 degrees. Let's now go to the slope dimension, and we are going to use this ramp here, which has a kind of slope. And you can see that if I place this dimension here, we have already mentioned the slope of this ramp here. And you can always go to edit and change this unit formats. You see I'm using the percentage here, but you can always choose what you want in here. You can use the ratios and so on, but here I want to keep it as percentages. And now I hit apply. If I want to change this one, I can go on and use maybe the ratio. Hit OK and hit apply. You can see that you have ratio of 12. I will go back to this one and use percentages because it is the most accurate one. Now let's look on how to edit dimension when we have finished to place them. For instance, if we want to maybe move this particular dimension, if for instance we want to move this one from this point to another point here, for instance like this, you can see we have this leader here. We can decide to maybe keep it or remove it by checking or uncheck this leader icon here. Now, going to place it back in its position, and I'm going to select this dimension and go to edit types. We have various types we can change here, such as the dimension tick mark here. We can change, you can go to the drop down menu here and choose between what we want here. The diagonal 3 millimeters is always the default, but you can choose maybe the field 50 degrees and then hit apply. If you hit apply, you can see what happens in here. Let me maybe go a little bit okay, and you can see what happens on the dimensions here. Let me select it again and go back to edit type, and you can choose between what you want. Here you can choose the maybe open dot, click OK and see what happens here. But I always prefer to have the diagonal 3 millimeters, which is the default. You can also change the thickness of the tick mark here. For instance, you put it to 4, something like that. Update, or go to the dimension line extension. You can put the gaps. For instance, if I put 2 millimeters and then hit apply, you can see how the dimension extension extends. Hit OK. Maybe let me select this one to make it much more visible. Let me use this one, maybe use 2 millimeters and apply. You can see how this changes, and if I put it to 0, you can now see how they are changing. Let's now go to the text, and what we have to do here is maybe to change the text sizes. For instance, I put 5. If I put 5 and apply, you can see the texts are becoming bigger, and I'm going to bring it back to 3. And the text offsets, if I put maybe 2, apply, you can now see how the text offsets from the dimension lines. Now I'm going to put 0 again, and you can also maybe change a lot of things on here, but I'm going to skip everything and go to the units. You can change the unit formats here. You can change between centimeters. If you are using Imperial, you can also use the types here. For instance, if I'm using I want to use meters, I can check this one, hit OK, and place here. You can see how things are changing, but I'll bring it back to centimeters for this particular project. You can also allow the rounding and the unit symbol. If I put maybe 2 decimals, you can see that if I hit OK and hit apply, you can see what happens. But I do not really like that because I'm using the centimeters. You can also use unit symbol. If I use centimeters and hit OK and hit apply, you can see that we have the centimeters as the symbol unit. But I do not really like to put any of this. I'm going to remove them. Now this is the same to alternative units, and these are all you can do about editing these dimensions. But you can also edit the text sizes, fonts. You can underline the text. If I apply, you can see what is happening. Apply. You have to make it maybe bold to see what happens. You can see what happens to the text. You have different options, maybe italic. Apply, see what happens. But I do not really like any of these. I like to keep them as default.